Welcome to Fusion Forum, the podcast nourishing your creative soul. Sponsored by Fusion Theater Company, Albuquerque's own professional producing theater company located in the land of enchantment. That would be the great state of New Mexico. With me today is poet, educator, writer, actor, proud father, musician, and deputy director for the City of Albuquerque's Cultural Services Department. That would be Hakim Bellamy. Welcome to Fusion Forum, Hakim.
Hi, Laurie. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And would you describe yourself as a contemporary archetype of the Renaissance man?
Would I describe myself as that?
Yes,
No.
given all those attributes I just
Sure.
listed, would that ring true to you at all?
It's certainly a humble to. I'm certainly humbled to even be mentioned in the same sentence as the term Renaissance man. For me, that term has always meant not necessarily a jack of all trades, master of none, but like a master of all trades. And I certainly don't think I'm that. But I know that I've been fortunate enough to be able to have the support of friends and family, have the support of this state and this city, and being able to try on a lot of different hats to see if they fit. The more that you do that and have success, the more likely and emboldened you are to try things that might be outside of your wheelhouse again. I've been fortunate that a bunch of those things have gone pretty well.
Wonderful. Well, speaking of outside your wheelhouse, would you have ever dreamt that you would be in the middle of a crisis management scenario for your own city?
No. And sometimes in my, in my more self-conscious moments, I'm like that. I'm terrified that I get to be at the wheel, but
Right.
but I feel like it's all I feel encouraged by the folks around me. I feel like the mayor all the way down, this administration has been one who has really tried to show crisis leadership, but have been honest about the fact that none of us have been here before. All the way through to our environmental health director, our newly minted environmental health director for the city. Ryan and I go way back. We were part of a Kellogg Foundation leadership program. So I've known him for a few years before he came here, but he actually did work for FEMA in New Orleans. And he was like, this is very different. Like, we've never been here before. And so I just feel like that, there's a lot of grace and humility that comes with that, to be able to say, okay, well, you're not expected to know everything, but you are expected to make good decisions with the information that you have. You're certainly not supposed to disregard information or science, for that matter. And
Right.
you take it seriously, because lives are at stake. And, in my department, to a lesser extent, lives are at stake, which is why we've closed the museums. We don't want people gathering. But it's also jobs. Like, we have to take care of, 360 full-time employees, and figure out all the HR stuff that's involved with that. And of course, the business of keeping the city running. And so we have to keep the budgets and everything moving forward, including working with local arts organizations.
Right. So sustaining our arts organizations obviously is really important, and everything is shut down as far as venues and theaters. And so, how is the city sort of spearheading, at least for the first few weeks or even month? How are you dealing with this scenario?
Yeah, we're trying to look at these responses as opposed to like short term and long term. And that's even something that the mayor talks about. There's the short term response, the immediate kind of triage, and then there's the long term response, which is designed to like moderate, the long term impacts, right? And so to make it, cut and dry, like the short term response is the health emergency, the long term response is the economic impact, right? And so we're working much more in our department on the long term. There's amazing organizations on the ground that, like Arts Hub, give shout out to Arts Hub, that I've personally supported, because what they're doing is they're providing relief grants directly to artists. And so if an artist is like, hey, I worked in the gig economy twice over. I was waiting
Right.
tables and bartending, and I, was a musician, and I can do neither of those things right now. And so they would qualify for some sort of relief assistance, up to like $500 that could help get their rent paid for this month. And
Absolutely.
we're hopeful this doesn't go much longer than that, but a month without income can really put somebody under. And so there a number of organizations that are providing that. It's difficult for us to do that because we're a steward of taxpayer dollars. But the workaround that we've kind of been working on is to help sustain the creative ecosystem so that organizations can outlast this downturn. And so, yeah, eventually we hope people will start doing shows again, and people will start going out again and supporting the creative economy. In the meantime, how do we help stabilize those organizations that we don't want to disappear or evaporate or
Exactly.
dry up in this moment? And you see governments do that all the time. In fact, the federal government just voted to do that, for different industries like the airline industry and things like that. But it's nice. It's nice that they're going to throw a little bit of change at the little guy too. So.
Right. And you're looking for some creative ways for these organizations to provide online content right now, correct?
Yes, yeah, that's the thing that we're trying to roll out, just to say, hey, if you're an existing arts organization who, due to the public health emergency, you can't have people gather, but you still have artists that are creating, you still have artists that need to be paid, that we will provide opportunities for them to produce digital and online content that they can submit to the city, that we can then put out on distribute on our platforms through GovTV, through the public access channels, on our various web platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. And we're doing a lot of that internally in our department already through our divisions like the Albuquerque Museum, through Explora, through the libraries have a wide array of content that they've always kind of ongoing had, but it's like now people are being directed towards it, which was really going to be a change for the better for them on the other side of this public health emergency.
Excellent. So now I'm going to take you to the existential. What does art mean today on March 26th in the middle of COVID-19? What does art mean, for instance, to an individual that's grappling today with sheltering in, being at home? What does it mean? What can it mean?
Yeah, I think I would take it first to like what it does for the artist, and then later like what it does for society. But I think what it does for the artists immediately is like, I feel like most artists already have a practice of going in before they go out, right? And so these songs, these scripts, these short stories, these poems, even if they're about the world around you, and that's how you investigate the world around you. I like as a writer, I really like that idea that that's how we explore the world, is through writing it, turning it on its head, turning it around, looking at it from over here, shaking it up. And so I imagine most of us already had a practice of coping and a practice of arriving at some sort of meaningful interpretation of the world around us. Because of my like nascent Buddhist practice, I look at that as going in, like exploring who you are, going deep to the places that hurt, to the places that are scared, and to the bright spots inside of you. And you pull that out, drag it out of you, and then you throw it out into the world in hopes that it connects to other people and draws other human beings to you. And so I feel like we're fortunate as artists to have that tool right now, especially in an age of social distancing, right? And social
Right.
isolation. And so I
A lot
encourage
of
artists to lean into that, lean into your practice, now if you can.
That's great. A lot of artists I'm talking to right now, they're describing, you know, um, sort of moments of intense focus and creative impetus that are broken.
Hmm.
Almost like a bad meditation session, right? Where
Yeah.
the stuff starts flooding into your head, and you try to kind of let it be there and make peace with it. But then the creative impetus is interrupted, and they're experiencing that a lot. And I like your idea of this, the reaching in and pulling out. Would there be other ways that you would suggest to artists to keep that flow?
Yeah, well, I want to double back a little bit to say, like, as far as the social implication of art in these times, I'm seeing a lot of it, in my own like personal social media feeds about artists going outside of themselves and helping other artists, and knowing that there's ways for artists to impact the world besides just their art. I think
Yeah.
that's something that's going to be not soon forgotten when things go back to quote unquote normal. I think artists are going to realize that their skills are in demand, more so than just entertainment or edutainment. And I feel like, artists have always been, the kind of pulse of society, and we always have these philosophical conversations about whether it's chicken egg or egg chicken. Like, do we reflect
Right.
society and interpret society, or does it reflect us? And and
Yes.
it's an interpretation of who we are. But I feel like, the art that's going to be made during this time, and then the art that follows this time, I think is going to have hopefully more of a human element, as we miss being around humans. Maybe sometimes distance
Yes.
makes the heart, social distance makes the heart grows fonder, but I feel like also that, yeah, I just think that there's these moments in generations where everybody is writing, making, musing on the same thing. And this is one of those moments. And I'll be curious to see 10 or 15 years from now when they're doing anthology of short fiction stories written during,
Right.
coronavirus 19, what that did to people. Like what evidence will there be of the paradigm shift in that art that's going to be created moving forward?
Absolutely. Me too. Um, so you grew up on the East Coast in New Jersey?
Yes, ma'am. Proud Jersey boy.
Yeah, and so do you have family back there still?
I do. I do. I have my mom. My father passed this past summer. So
Oh,
it's my
I'm
mom
sorry.
and my I said three brothers, two brothers, Rashid and Tyler. And I'm the
How
oldest
are
of the
they
three boys.
doing?
They're doing good. Rashid and Tyler both have young families. And so they've kind of for a while now been a little bit at shelter in place. New Jersey even imposed a 8 p.m. curfew, I guess, last week. And so,
Uh-huh.
and but they've been over to see mom and check on mom because that's a gathering of less than five. I've FaceTimed with her, and my son and I FaceTime with her and try to see our nieces and nephews over there as much as possible. And then my mom works for the federal government, and she works for the FAA, but their business is slow right now, and
Right.
so she's
Right.
been working from home for a
Wow.
while. But I'm fortunate my mom is she's I guess you could say she's like just on the front end of that vulnerable population,
Sure.
of elders, but she's in good health, except she has like a respiratory cough that's seasonal that we worry about, especially right now.
Sure. Sure. When you were growing up in New Jersey, as a kid, when were you introduced to theater? When did you even know what that was?
When did I know? Like, oh, so this is crazy. I didn't know what it was till later. But my mom and dad, I used to joke. My mom used to be like, "Boy, you're gonna get this culture. You're gonna take this culture kicking and screaming." So they used to make us go see the Nutcracker every winter. So that was like my exposure to ballet. And
Great.
the first like shows, big, like not not even local professional theater, but like big shows, like going to see a big show in Philadelphia, were mainly musicals, and many of them were like in a tradition of old black church musicals. But it was like to see people being on stage singing and dancing and saying, you really get to escape yourself, and some say escape. I guess I don't fully subscribe to the escape. I think it's really a practice of radical empathy. So you really get to try on someone else's life for a little bit. You try on someone else's shoes. Like you really have to. It's an exercise, a practice, and in meditation, and not just feeling like someone else, but literally being someone else for a short amount of time. And then later in life, I was in theater in high school. Like they were always needed more boys, which is the typical problem
Oh,
theaters
that's
always.
typical, yes.
We need more guys. Like ask the soccer players if they want to do it. And I used to like crew, and occasionally I had like one or two lines in a play, and I tried to pretend I was shy. But when I was young, my brother Rashid and I were 18 months apart. We used to spend. And this is like the pre-video game era. We were not a wealthy family. We didn't get Nintendo till it was much later. So when we were like 6 and 8, or 7 and 9, or 8 and 10, we used to for hours like. And we loved movies. We watched movies till we were blue in the face. So I had a notion of what acting was, and And when I was young, I thought it was just pretending. Then I got older and became a real actor and realized it is not pretending. But but we used to do
Right.
something called let's play a game, and we would just like for 2 hours, like if we had just seen Teen Wolf or some movie, 80s movie that we really liked, we would like play out the sequels and just talk through it. Like, okay, now I'm the captain of the high school basketball team, and then I'm getting ready to go to college, and these guys don't like me and they like bully
That's
me.
great.
And I'm trying to meet the girl
Yeah.
of my dreams. And we would just like do that for hours, like again and again and again for like 4 or 5 years. And I feel like that's when I really started getting into roles, right? And even writing.
Yes.
I would say that was the beginning of me writing because I didn't write poetry back then, but it was the beginning of me saying, if you can tell a story um, and make people feel something, there's power in that. And
So it
yeah,
sounds a little bit like the role playing or the storytelling through role playing came before the poetry then.
much before, long before. And it's ironic that it took me becoming a poet and probably getting a little more comfortable with myself in public on stages and things like that, that then got me invited back to the theater, right? Then people were like, yeah, he could speak without saying ums, and he seems to be able to memorize for long periods at a time. Maybe he'd be a good actor, right? and
Right,
and I
right.
got invited to do a role here and a role there, and then more roles here and more roles there. And yeah, I really enjoy it. I find it, for me personally, way more challenging. Not that I know everything there is to know about poetry, but I have my style and my practice. I feel like
Right.
for acting, it's much more of a stretch for me. Like I have to really work hard to keep up and not let my castmates down. But I like the challenge. I think it makes, when I go back to poetry, it makes me a better poet. You know.
Interesting. How do those 2 feed each other?
I think a lot of it is that, like, when you're writing, and this might not be true for all writers. I'm happy for those writers listening to this podcast to disagree. I feel like you don't generally write with a particular audience in mind, right? You're doing this excavation and you're playing with poetic elements, rhyme, meter, metaphor. You're playing with those things. You're really trying to create, like, something that has energy and impact, right? It makes people think, and it does all the things it's supposed to do. But really, the way the audience receives it is almost secondary. Um, and even as a performance poet, I would say that's true. Even though performance poets do have a little more of an eye towards how's an audience gonna how they gonna react to this, right?
How they gonna react or connect?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I feel like when I'm acting, I am already othering in many ways. I'm already othering. I'm already trying to have a process for what's this person's motivation, what's this person's backstory, like the questions that you ask when you're really developing a character. And then I go back to poetry with those same questions, and so it helps the writing process. But it always kind of puts me outside of myself in some ways, and then I'm able to, when I'm looking at my own work, I'm able to look at it from what I think is a different perspective. I mean, they're all my perspectives, but it feels like I have more tools to really be able to say, huh. This line might go like this, or it might go like that. I can see someone interpreting it a little differently than I am right now. Um, and so
Right.
maybe it's a crap line and I get rid of it, like,
Yeah.
or maybe I want the ambiguity and I keep it, like, so
Yeah.
those kind of things I think I do better. Um, and I guess the other piece too is just that acting generally, unless you're doing a monologue or a solo show, is done ensemble, and writing is
Yes.
something we do alone. Like, and so I feel like having also that dichotomy, when I'm done with a play and a cast and all the energy of all those show nights, like I go like, but when I go back to writing, all kind of different things pour out that aren't that didn't necessarily genesis in Hakim. You know?
Right, right. We're gonna take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with you. Hold on, Hakeem.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Fusion Forum, the podcast. Today I'm speaking with Hakim Bellamy. And Hakim, you were an athlete, or quite an accomplished athlete, through your youth and even high school, even college. What what sports were of interest, and what did you learn from that arena that you're able to take into the artistic arena?
Yeah, I mean, accomplished. Those are strong words, but thanks for that, Laurie. But I
Okay.
did. I mean, I'm a lifelong soccer player. I come from my immediate family are like all like soccer fanatics. My extended family, my dad and his brothers, they were all like football players and basketball players. My dad's oldest brother, Uncle John, was a heavyweight boxer. He sparred with Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali. So come from a
Wow.
family of like big time sports guys. My dad has he still has he has he's one of six brothers and a sister, and all the brothers were athletes all the way up to the large. All the way up to the college level, to collegiate level, and some further than that. And so there was some pressure to play sports. There was a lot of pressure to play American football, but my mom would have none of it because she thought it was brutal. And now with all this concussion stuff coming out, I'm glad she
Right.
did that. And so she was like,
Mom probably knew
yeah,
best, huh?
yeah. And so she's like, it would be hard to be a poet with head trauma. So she was well, let's be honest. Poets have plenty of head trauma. So
You're right.
right,
Figuratively speaking. Right.
exactly, mostly self-inflicted. But we all played soccer because my mom thought it was a good alternative. I played soccer through high school. It was my first sport. I also ran track and played basketball. Um, I was a good enough basketball player, but even as tall as I am by New Mexico standards, I was too short. And track was just to keep in shape for the other things. But my parents also had a swimming pool when we were young. We were like one of the few black families in the suburbs to have like an above ground pool. So we learned how to swim, and I was a lifeguard for a while. So I've just always had this kind of physical, like that's to me just made sense because that's what I saw a lot of growing up. And then I had the opportunity both in high school and in later years in college to play overseas. I got to play soccer in Belgium for a little bit.
Wow.
It was like a tournament kind of thing. It was like a ambassadorial team, tri-state team that we got to go play some games over there. And I
Oh, that's
coached junior
terrific.
college soccer. And now most of my coaching is reserved for my son's basketball and soccer teams. But I've always found sports for me, and I know it's in this country. It's interesting because we, canonize athletes and they get paid disproportionately a lot of money to, to do things that teachers do that are equally as miraculous. But so I feel I have this kind of love hate relationship with the way the star power that we put behind people who can do something good because. Like your mechanic, it can also do something really good that you can't do, and you pay him way less than you pay LeBron James. So there's
Right.
that. There's that. Those are my issues with athletics, but I find by and large, it made me. It's a way I still make friends. Like I still play in like the old people's co-ed soccer leagues. It's a way for me to meet people that frankly, don't share my political views. Meet people who have jobs who I would have never met because our occupations are so very different. And so I still think sports has a place for holding all that power. It's still a place where seven kids who don't know each other can show up at a basketball court with a basketball and be lifelong friends and stay there for 7 hours. And I feel
Right.
I find magic in that. And I found later in life I was able to do the same thing with poetry. Like my best friends, people who've had me in their weddings, people who've had me officiate their weddings, have been folks that I've met by being on slam teams. And we talk about slam poetry, which is how my career really began there. I'm fortunate to have a couple of published books now, but it was really
Right.
performance poetry. And the thing about a slam team is that it is a team. It's not the lonely, poet archetype, the loner poet archetype, but it's definitely
Exactly.
like, it's four or five people that write together, that collaborate on group poems, that are getting daily critique on their pieces that you normally don't get unless you're in an MFA or a writing program. And so it's like that. That was really to me, that reminded me a lot of being on a soccer team. It was just like it wasn't foreign. It was something that was very comfortable to me. And being able to take critique and people telling you to kill your darlings and people being
Yeah,
like, yeah,
right.
that's not a good line. You can do better. Because that's what we do on a
Yeah,
soccer field. It's like, dude, get them next time, but yo, get your head up, right?
that's
And so
great.
they're that kind of that was always familiar to me. So it was easy to transition to what we sometimes call the competitive, we call it poetry. We call slam poetry the competitive art of performance poetry or something like that. That's Mark
Right.
Smith's title for
Right.
it. I call it full contact poetry. That's what
I like that.
like,
I like that. So you mentioned your son, and I'm a theater educator, and I've taught for many, many years. Gosh, I guess over 25 now. And I always say that my students keep me honest as an artist. How does your son keep you honest as an artist?
when I'm doing theater productions, it's great because he's at the age now. He's 12, and I basically put all my lines on index cards so I can like run them in the car because we spend a lot of time in the car because he's on a very competitive soccer team and they practice like 5 days a week in games on his weekends. And so when we're driving, I'll be like, "Hey, let me run my lines," and he'll read the script and leave out the parts where I'm supposed to say something, and he'll like roll his eyes when I miss my cue. And then by the time he comes and sees the show, he knows my lines better than me. So it's like nice to have him around because
That's right. Yeah.
so that's I think that's great, and I think that I also like when he was born, I was in a really early part of my career, and me and his mother were still trying to figure things out. But I know that I was terrified, first of all, because I was, what was I, 29, about the time we were, with child. And I didn't know what I was going to do because I'd never been here before. And I started, coming up with these doomsday scenarios like, I'm going to have to quit everything I love to do and go get a job at the factory to support this child. I was caught up in some pre-industrial revolution kind of nightmare that I thought I was going to live.
Exactly.
And then,
Yeah.
I slapped myself out of it and shook myself and be like, dude, get over it. And my mom, of course, she was like, boy, you're going to have to try way harder than that this child is stronger than you think. And I've seen parents with way less, aptitude than you become good parents. So like,
Right.
stop psyching yourself out of this. If you're scared, but don't pretend you can't do it. Like, and now I look at this many years later, and having for a certain part of his life, raising him wholly as a full-time artist for a few years, knowing that, he's the reason, like I've worked harder at my craft. He's the reason that my craft kind of went from being a cool hobby that got me to, see the world. I got to tour and travel. Great way to meet girls, standing
Yeah.
up in bars, reading poems. And so like it served me in many, many different ways. But at the end of the day, it was like, dude, if you're going to do this, do this. Because if you're not, there's somebody else that's depending on you and needs you to really lean into the things that are going to build a life for him.
That's
And at
great.
that time I said, well, I think I can do that with my art, even though no one else does. And I'm gonna show you, like I'm gonna be the type of parent that doesn't tell you to do something I wouldn't do myself. So when I say chase your dreams, I mean it, and I did.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think that's sort of profoundly inspiring. And I always try to impart that to my students as well. Ultimately, there's ways that you can do it. You can cobble things together. You can find a path. And if your passion is such that it leads you into the arts, you need to follow it. And
Yeah,
there's
and
a
won't be
there's
happy
a
when it.
lot there's a lot of discouragement, of course. Let me ask you this. Have there ever been times where you've resented being labeled or introduced as a poet?
No, I don't. I think you know why, Laurie. This is funny you said that because I feel like when I first became the poet laureate of Albuquerque, like Albuquerque picked me, which I was, and I continually am flabbergasted by. I'm continually
Right.
flabbergasted how essentially a city with like 6% African American population says, "Hey, that guy, we're gonna let that guy be our mascot." And you know what? When he writes stuff, I can relate to it. And so it always encourages me that like I feel less alone. I feel less like a sticking out like a sore thumb because I'm like, people who look nothing like me and come from backgrounds totally different from mine, hear a poem of mine and go, I get it. I relate. Same here. Like, and I feel like that to me is magical. It continues to baffle me, frankly.
Yeah,
In
it
the
opens.
industry.
So
So
for you, it opens up connection.
it opens up connection and
Yeah.
so I remember when we first had the big ceremony in the bottom of the downtown library. Mayor Barry at the time was the mayor, and through my poetry, him and I became good friends, and eventually I worked in his administration too. But I was the joke that I made, and I can't remember exactly how it was. It was way funnier back then. Was that when I show up places and people say, "Hey, the poet laureate of Albuquerque," before they say Hakim, as soon as they say Hakim, it immediately ethnicizes me, right? But
Yeah.
before that, they're like the poet laureate, and people are like looking around. They're like, "Where is he?" Like, I'm looking for like an old white guy, or like,
Right.
frankly, is he alive? Because most poets are dead. Uh,
Right. Right.
that we, at least the ones we learn in school,
Or
they're dead.
acknowledged, right?
Right,
We acknowledge the dead ones. Yes.
and then I like sheepishly raise my hand, and they're like, "Nah," they're like, "No shit," like, "Yeah, he's the poet laureate."
That's
Like,
great.
I like the surprise of it. Like once people like realize, and they're like, and then later they're usually like, and once they get comfortable with me, and they feel a little less like, I guess maybe even embarrassed about like not knowing it was me in the first place. They're like, "So what exactly does a laureate do?" Right? And I was like,
Ex
you know,
right.
and I'm like, basically, I'm here I'm here to just be a in vitro observer of the human experience and try to put words to it. Sometimes I'm
I love that
successful, and
description.
sometimes I'm not. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So when you go out into the world, what do you what do you express about this place in which we live? It is a pretty idiosyncratic place, New Mexico, in many respects. What do you treasure, and what do you express about it when you go out into the world?
I get a lot of inquiries from my friends and family back home in New Jersey. A lot of them have never been here, and they're always like, even this many years later, right? I've lived here 16 years now, and so
Yeah.
they're still like, so what's it like, man? And I send them pictures. Now I can send them video. I send them all kind of things. But I was like, you don't get a good sense of it through any of those mediums. You have to like go. Like I could take a picture of the sky, but that gives you no perspective for the immensity of the sky in New Mexico, right? And so when I remember when I would go home the first couple times after I moved here, I'm trying to explain it to my mom, who's a Bronx girl, right? Bronx native, right?
Right.
And I was like, mom, it's like this. I said, when we want to look at the sky here in South Jersey, Philadelphia, New York, we look up. I was like, when you want to look at the sky in New Mexico, you literally cock your head east as far as it can go, and you make a trajectory that of about 180 degrees until your ear touches your other shoulder. That's how you look at the sky in New Mexico. And she's like, well, that's elaborate. And I'm like, yeah. That's the
Right.
things that are hard to explain unless you come here. Like when you explain to people the idea of like just energy. Like it wasn't until I moved to the Southwest, and I was doing my initial poetry touring on one of my first slam teams, and we ended up in Sedona, Arizona, and I'm like tripping out on people and all the energy work, and it's not like I had not experienced it before, but like the energy work, the work with crystals, calling these places energy vortexes, calling Albuquerque an artist vortex per capita,
Yes.
people flocking to places like this, like earlier movements, American movements of visual artists that landed up as the Tau Society of Artists, and you're like, it's not, these things are not chance. How these, like, with the energy and the type of person that either just passes through, or the type of person that passes through, comes back and stops and moves here. And I was like, that to me is so interesting to continue to explore. And I fancy myself likely doing that one day as well. Like I even say, if I were ever to move, and I still have lots of parts of the world that I want to see, lots of places in the world I want to live, I would always have a home here. I would just keep a home here. Like if I'm fortunate enough to have two homes, in a nation where some people don't have any, but that would be what I would do.
I agree. So many of my students, and understandably, when they grow up here in Albuquerque, they want to go out of state for college. They want to set their sights on perhaps an urban environment or a big city. And I completely understand that desire. I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in Oakland and San Francisco and Berkeley, and lived in Seattle for 15 years. So I completely understand the desire for the energy of an urban center, but I always encourage them to keep this as their artistic home. So if they need to recenter, or if they need that plug in of energy, don't forget about where we live and
Sure.
where you grew up, because it is a rather divine place.
It really is, and I love how you said that. I'm glad that you are still in the education system because I'm not so much
Right.
anymore. Telling young people that, like, but I would say this is the other quirky thing. Like when I'm out and about and I run into people from New Mexico, and it's just weird. Like in the randomest places, airport in
I
Chicago.
run into
Like,
them everywhere.
and
We call it my husband and I call it the big eye effect.
is that okay? Thank you for giving me language for it because I'm like, and it's like we'll like walk past each other and give each other that kind of side look, and then just kind of come back, and then later be like,
Right.
so I noticed maybe because of something they had on or something, and they're like, I was like,
Right.
are you from New Mexico? And they're like, how did you know? I was like, yeah, I had a feeling.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So we were both, and we hopefully still are, in a play, Annie Baker's The Antipodes, and we had to put that on hold because of the pandemic. Where just to wrap up here, the thing I went through all my lines the other night. It was funny. I just sat in a chair and went through all my lines, and it was um, it was fun, and it was a little poignant to just go through all the lines, and but it was also revelatory to just be with her language for a bit. Um, where are you in the Antipodes equation?
I think it is spectacularly bizarre that we were in the middle of this play and this
Yeah.
script with this group of people at this time, and it's
Right.
it's it's like it's so. Yeah, I don't know. Like whatever you believe in, the universe, a higher power. I'm like they say that God doesn't have a sense of humor. I was like, this shit is funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
because I mean,
I
there's
agree.
so many of those lines directly speak to what's happening right now. And what we were challenged with, right, as a team, as a cast, with the character Sandy, the character Paul's character of like something monstrous and it being so nebulous, so ephemeral, but we're trying to create it out of our heads, and
Right.
Mother Nature always one ups you, and they're like, and even in our, however people are listening feel about the current president of the United States, the current occupant of whatever, Pennsylvania Avenue,
Right.
that he even said it, and we don't know him as being much of a linguist, but he said that, like, this, what do you call it, the invisible enemy, like, like even like
Yes.
phrases like that are like, what's more monstrous, what's scarier than that, like,
Mhm. Right.
and so I think that
Right.
there's just some irony, and tragedy and what's happening right now. And we it's easy to, in hindsight, to say, "Hey, Annie knew," but she knew. And what the play is about is not so much about what the monster is. I mean, it's about how humans react to it in monstrous ways, right? Like,
Exactly.
and that's what we're really getting to see, all the way down to the run on toilet paper, right?
Right.
So,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But um, there's also a lot of hope and openness in the play that I appreciate particularly. I keep going back to my childhood, and the
yeah,
innocence. You have so much. You can have a lot of, pardon the French, but you can have a lot of shit coming at you as a little kid. But you process it, and you're able to sort of take on the dragon
yeah,
through storytelling and
true
role
story.
playing, just like you described, you and your brothers playing for hours, replaying those stories. And I think there's power in that. So I really look forward to
Actually
being
putting it up.
right, to actually being, in closer proximity than 6 feet, and having an audience and actually performing this wonderful play with you.
Yeah,
So
I want to say, Laurie, it's been a pleasure and an honor to watch you work. You're
oh,
like
thank you.
I feel like I was lucky to be handpicked for this cast, and again, that's one of those things where shout out to Jackie and Dennis. They trust me. They're like, he can do it.
Yeah,
Sometimes other people
absolutely.
have to believe in you more before you believe in yourself in that way. But yeah, I just feel like this was also another opportunity for me to be in a room, you know, because I didn't go to school for theater, but to be in a room with folks who, you know, have chops and experience, and just be able to watch you guys. Oh, so that's how you crawl into someone else's character, or someone else's. That's how you really crawl into someone else's story, and inhabit a role, as they say. So thanks for that.
Absolutely. Well, we want you to stay healthy and we want you to stay strong, and we send you all strength and good wishes in your city work right now, because it's really, really important. And all blessings go to the community of Albuquerque. And thank you so much
Absolutely.
for this interview and spending some time with us.
This is a gift, and it's cool
Uh,
to continue to get to know you in different ways, my friend.
all right.
Shout out to Fusion
Okay.
Theater, Fusion Forum.
Excellent. Bye bye.
Bye bye.